It is a truth universally acknowledged that a reader in possession of a good book must be in want of another. If that sounds like you, come along with me as I explore my bookshelves, read you stories, talk to authors, and chat about all the books as we search for our next great read. Grab your favorite book, a cup of tea, and settle in for the greatest adventures ever imagined. Welcome to the Bookshelf Odyssey Podcast. Now, I've been looking forward to this episode for quite a few weeks. In today's episode, we are blasting into the future. I will be doing an interview with science fiction writer Naomi Kritzer, who is currently nominated for the Hugo Award for her absolutely delightful little short story called Little Free Library. I'm going to talk a bit about science fiction in this episode, as well as look at a little bit of a deep dive into the history of little free libraries. Let's go ahead and jump in. What have I been reading? Well, in preparation for the show, I read Naomi Kritzer's collection called Cat Pictures, Please, and Other Stories. There are several great short stories in that collection, including Cat Pictures, Please, which is a wonderful story that we'll talk about that in the interview. But then another story that really stood out to me in that collection was The Good Son. The Good Son tells the story of a fairy who falls in love with a mortal woman, and he goes into the real world to, try to seduce her. But he gets a little more than he bargained for when he actually falls in love with her. And that's all I'll say about that story, but it is a powerful, beautiful story that just emotionally wrecked me. It's one of the strongest collections of sci-fi short stories that I've read in a very long time. I just would highly recommend it. Each story has imagination and wonderful science fiction plots, but yet there's heart to them. There's real emotion, and a great story is told in such a few amount of pages that I really think that Naomi Kritzer is becoming one of the masters of the science fiction short story. But this year she's up for the Hugo Award for Little Free Library, which is probably my favorite of those stories that have been nominated for Best Short Story. It's just really, really good and reinforces the belief that I have that books are magic. And so that's what's been on my shelf this week. And I'd love to hear from you what you've been reading, what's on your shelf. You can let me know. Send me an email to bookshelfodysseypodcast@gmail.com. So let's keep the conversation going in the email or online, and let me know what you're reading. I am always looking forward to adding to my TBR list. Before we get to Naomi Kritzer, I want to just talk about science fiction as a genre for a moment. One of the first genres that I enjoyed reading as a kid were mysteries, and I got into, the Hardy Boys. That's how I started, and from there it developed a love of mysteries. But my love for science fiction did not begin with a book. It began with movies. As many kids from the 80s can testify, I was a huge Star Wars fan. And now back then, we only had the 3 films and a couple of really awfully made TV movies that we don't speak of today. But I love the trilogy. I loved trying to build the spaceships out of my Legos and different things like that. Just were so imaginative and so creative. They really caught the attention, of your grade school aged boy. Getting a little bit older, young teenager, I began to watch Star Trek: The Next Generation in about the early 90s, I believe it was. Really started to enjoy that and began to find, Star Trek novelizations. The wonderful day I was walking through the library trying to find something to read, and lo and behold, I looked down at the shelves and I saw a blue book on, it was a spine of the book sticking out, and on it was C-3PO. And I thought, oh, what's that? And I pull out this book, and it was Heir to the Empire by Timothy Zahn. And it was the first of the Zahn Star Wars trilogy. And I almost lost my mind that there is new stories in the Star Wars universe. You're kidding me. And there it was, the whole trilogy of Timothy Zahn's Star Wars trilogy. I hadn't even realized there were books being written set in that universe. And at the time, I think the Timothy Zahn trilogy was the only one that had been written at that point. So that pulled me in further deeper into Star Wars. And then I think of it as the day that changed my reading life forever. As I was looking around, I wanted just some deeper, different science fiction. And that's when I found the Ray Bradbury books. Martian Chronicles was my first Ray Bradbury, and it was like a gateway opening to the entire world of science fiction. You know, I'd heard of guys like Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke and Ray Bradbury. I'd heard of them, but hadn't really read them. And thanks to the marvelous Martian Chronicles that, I'll be honest, at the time I was maybe 13, 14 years old. I did not fully understand or appreciate all that was going on in that story. But the ending blew me away with its emotional impact, its opportunity for redemption for mankind in the ashes of the worlds that they've destroyed. Whether we deserve that renewal, that redemption or not, we could debate all that. But that part really just kind of took my breath away. And reading it now as an adult, I get so much more of the subtext and the metaphors and all the beauty of his writing that I didn't understand even as a kid. But this is what I love about Ray Bradbury, is that my understanding of his writing has grown with me as I've matured. And now I'm in my mid 40s now. And, as I've had life lessons and as I've had different things happen, in my life and a better and deeper understanding of the world, it's his books just become deeper and more rich to me the more I read them. Coming up probably in October, you'll have to check out my YouTube page. It's the Bookshelf Odyssey. Just search for that on YouTube and I'll come up there. I've had a BookTube channel there, and I'm planning to probably talk about Ray Bradbury at some point on there, as well as on here. But on the video, you'll actually get to see the books I own, and I'm hoping to kind of talk about some of them and show you some of the Ray Bradbury books in my collection. Anyway, so that's really my journey into science fiction and my love for science fiction. And so today, I think there are some stories being told in the genre of science fiction that would rival any of the great works of literature that have come before us. It just so happens they set it in a science fiction genre, but I think there's some tremendous storytelling happening in that field. One of the recent ones is, well, years ago, the film A Quiet Place came out. I would call that science fiction, but those films tell such a powerful story of family and of love and of forgiveness and of sacrifice that rivals anything I've read in some of the classics, But sometimes a story like that can be easily dismissed because, it's a genre film, it's a genre book, so it doesn't count as real literature. Well, I got to be honest, I disagree with that completely. I think it can be quote unquote literature, even if there's spaceships and dinosaurs. But that's my take on it. Maybe you disagree, maybe you agree. That's fine. But science fiction is one of my favorite genres of all time, up there with mysteries. And yeah, those are probably my two favorites. So I'm excited to talk to Naomi Kritzer. Naomi Kritzer is a Hugo award-winning writer for the story Cat Pictures, Please. This year, she is up for 2 Hugo Awards for her novelette entitled Monster and her short story, Little Free Library. She's written short stories, collections, and is currently writing a young adult series called Catnet. The first book is called Catfishing on Catnet. And the second one that was released just this year, I believe, is called Chaos on Catnet. So Naomi Kritzer is our guest today. And welcome to the Bookshelf Odyssey Podcast, Naomi.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
I'm glad to have you on. I came across your story, Little Free Library, just as I was starting to plan for authors and things for this new podcast. And I thought, oh, I got to have her on. This is a great story. I guess my first question is, you like cats apparently, huh?
Yes. Yeah, sometimes there's one that comes and hangs out on that bookcase behind me when I'm video chatting people.
Yeah.
It's always great because, having your cat show up on your screen is always a bonus.
Right. I listen to either podcasts or watch vlogs or whatever, and they're always apologizing when their pets jump in and make an appearance. But I'm like, no, it's great.
Yes.
I love it.
Who doesn't want to see the pets? Like the pets are always.
Yeah, I'd rather see the cat than you, No, just kidding.
I don't want to put it in quite those terms, but yeah, right. Like,
yeah.
It's kind of no downside to seeing people's pets.
Right. All right. Well, I'm so glad you were able to come on, and it's an honor to talk with you today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming a writer, and what were the things that inspired you along the way?
I've been telling stories since I was really little. When I was in grade school, I was one of those kids who preferred to play the let's pretend games on the playground, where I would round up a group of people and make something up for us all to act out. As I got older, like everyone else, kind of outgrew that, and so at that point I started writing my stories down. I first started submitting stories to magazines when I was in high school, although without any success until I was a bit older. I mean, at least any success in terms of selling anything for publication. I got some nice rejection letters, but that was it. And then in 1999, I sold my first short story, which was called Gift of the Winter King. I sold it to Realms of Fantasy, which was a magazine that was being published at the time. And that was appeared, I think, in the early part of, I think that appeared in early 2000 is when it was published. So, So I've been publishing fictions for about 20 years now. I've
been reading your Cat Pictures, Please collection of short stories, and I've really been enjoying those. So that I don't know if I've read that one yet, your first one, but
I don't know if it's in there.
Yeah,
like the collection is it's when you do a collection, you often don't publish everything you've ever published. You
right.
pick up the ones you think are your best.
Right.
And, I don't remember if Gift of the Winter King went in there or not.
What you said, because the one I read, I can't remember the title of it now. I was just going to look, but it's the one that it's your spin on the Ice Queen fairy tale.
Oh yeah, that's in the Witch's Garden.
Yes. Yeah. That was
the Snow Queen.
That was really good. Yeah. Well, I've been enjoying those. So
that one, actually, when I first started thinking about that story, that was one of the ones where what I really wanted was a movie. I had all these really clear images of sort of a post-apocalyptic winter landscape that I thought would look really cool. But I don't know the first thing about making movies.
Yeah.
I've written a screenplay, and I've certainly never made a film of anything other than casual video of my kid or something like that. So I was like, well, I can turn this into a story.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was neat how it was like some of the elements of a fairy tale, but there's a science twist to it. You have a talking dog, but he was engineered that way, I guess, if I remember right. And yeah, I was like, oh, this is fun. This was a lot of fun. So I recommend her collection of short stories is a great place to start if you've not read anything. I'm a sucker for short stories. So speaking of short stories, I guess, do you like writing short stories better than novels, or do they each have their own appeal?
They each have their own appeal. They each have their own, things that make them rewarding. One of the things I like about short stories is that I can write them more quickly. It takes me months to finish a novel, whereas short stories, sometimes some of these stories I've written in a day. Others take me longer, or I have to, go back and revise and, fix all the stuff that's wrong. But they're generally faster. They're generally faster to turn around, and they're faster to sell. And once you sell them, you see them in print sooner. And it's just more, it's not instant gratification, but it's faster. So I like that. I like that about short stories. And also, like, fundamentally, like, some ideas are really short story sized, and like some ideas are really novel sized. And like my very first novel started out, which is not catfishing, but a book that came out back in 2002 called Fires of the Faithful. That started out as a short story. And it was a short story that got bounced by multiple editors saying, this really reads like chapters 1 and 36 of a novel, and you left out all the stuff that mattered. And after like getting this very specific rejection multiple times, I was like, well, maybe I should turn this into a novel. Except then I tried to use the short story as chapter 1, and that didn't work at all. It really, like, the period of time covered by the short story became like the first half of the book, of the first book, because the book that I wrote wound up getting split into 2 books and published as 2 novels. But so it was like, I mean, the short story got turned into about 200,000 words of novel. And these editors were totally right. Like, there's a story about a connection between 2 young women, but most of what matters happens in between that, like the stuff that I just sort of, put in the short story, and then the climax at the end where, like, they're reunited and, one of them saves the other. So like it made it, that one was a novel sized, but like, there's plenty of others that are not.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's novels I've read where I thought, oh, this should have been a short story.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. No, there's like definitely. There's like 10,000 words worth of really good story here, and what a shame this person felt like it needed to be 90,000 words.
Yeah,
it happens.
Yep. Oh well. Well, and that's like I mentioned. This is what how I came to know. Be aware of who you are in your work. I was listening to another podcast, and they mentioned this story, Little Free Library, and said it was a really good one, and it was free. It's on tor.com right now, and you can just go and read it. But yeah, I went and read it. It's just this very short, very charming story with a little bit of darkness to it, which is just a lovely balance. I guess just to let folks know, as we're going to talk about this, so we might get into some spoilers. So, pause listening, go read the story. It won't take you long, and then come back so we can talk more freely about it. But where did you come up with this idea? I know as an author, you get asked that question probably all the time. Where do you get your ideas? But what's your inspiration behind this story?
So my friend Lyda, also a writer, this is Lyda Morehouse, who also writes as Tate Halloway. She has a little free library outside her house. And I, some years ago, when she first put it up, there's this specific sequence of books that sort of pass through the library. So somebody left a copy of Dostoevsky in it. And she saw this and was like, who goes to a little free library for like crime and punishment? But 2 days later, she leaves it. And 2 days later, she sees this older lady taking it out. And the older lady, when she sees Lyda, tells her in a Russian, the woman speaks with a Russian accent and says that she was so pleased to see this great Russian writer in the Little Free Library. And so she's going to practice her English by reading this great Russian writer in English. And Lyda was like, okay, cool. And it occurred to her that, like, at the time, she was right down the block from a little place that made like Russian pierogies or something like that, a Russian dumpling. They specialized in that specific item. It was a weird, tiny little tea house that had tea and then this one very specific Russian food. So she had a lot of Russian people passing through her neighborhood. So I told this story to a different friend, and this friend at the time was running the book sale for her child's school. They did a fundraiser where it was like a big used book sale, and at the end there were always a bunch of books that nobody had wanted that would get bagged up and hauled off to whoever would take them, basically. But after having heard this story, she set aside all the Russian language books and passed them on to me to give to Lyda, because she was like, maybe there are people in her neighborhood that would actually take advantage and would actually like these. And so I passed them along to Lida, and she put them out in the little free library a couple at a time. And they went like immediately. People grabbed them out of the shelves. They were clearly people really pleased to see, Russian language materials. And it made me think about, I was like, the little free libraries can be kind of magical. Sometimes they'll have like just the thing you need, and you won't even know until you look in it. So then I started thinking like about, what if there were a little free library that was literally magical rather than figuratively magical? And like what sorts of, like, who might find what they were looking for? What might they find that they didn't know they needed? And if you realized that your little free library was like a portal between worlds, like what would you do? Like how would you interact with this if you're a normal person with a little free library, and you start to suspect that like your little free library is magic, like what do you do at that point? And so that's where that was the set of ideas out of which came the short story that I wrote.
Well, and that's what first caught my attention about the story. I see those everywhere here. There's one in our park. I think I've seen some out on people's yards and things. I love how, you and other writers are able to take those common things we see and then turn it into a story that captivates. Books to me are like that magical portal, and so I started thinking, well, this story is this a tribute to stories and how they can take us to magical places? But then it's like, well, no, maybe not quite right, because it gets a little dark at the end. Like you were saying, whoever's on the other side of the portal is finding what they need for some kind of war going on.
Yeah. I mean, well, it is. I mean, it is also kind of a story about how books are themselves magic. I mean, that is kind of the fundamental magic of a real little free library, is that books are fundamentally magic in themselves.
Yeah.
Stories are magic. But yeah, no, I mean, I when I follow the idea to the end, sometimes I go somewhere a little, it gets a little dark at the end.
Yeah. That's not a bad thing. I mean, sometimes when we read, it takes us to dark places, but honestly, I found the ending very hopeful. When she has, again, spoiler alerts here. I hate spoiling things for people. So, but when she finds the egg and she takes it back, I don't know. I find that like maybe there's a little hope left for those people who are fighting on the other side. Yeah.
Yeah, clearly. I mean, clearly there's hope. So
yeah.
Although, I don't know. I think a dragon's going to hatch out of that egg, so I don't know what she's going to do with the dragon in St. Paul. People have asked for a sequel, and I'm like, okay, so it would basically be Stuart Little, but with a tiny dragon, and I'm not sure I actually want to write that.
Well, I'd read that. I mean,
well, yeah, everyone says that, and I'm like,
yeah.
But I don't know. What do you do? Can you enroll a dragon in the St. Paul public school system? I'm really not sure.
Right.
So,
well, I don't know. To me, a good short story is that one that leaves you wanting more, like that, or thinking about the ending for quite a while afterwards.
Yeah.
And again, I love that idea that bookstores are magical, or books are magical. The library is a magical place. Things like that. It's those little real life things that we identify with, and then you can spin a story out of that defies imagination. Yeah. Then another story of yours I read recently that I really enjoyed was the Cat Pictures, Please. Can you tell us a little bit about that story?
So that story, the place that idea came from, there were a couple of pieces that all came together. So the first was that I rather belatedly got myself a smartphone. And when, if you use a smartphone, there are things that it will do, like any technological device. There are things that will do that don't make a ton of sense. Like sometimes it'll give you'll want directions, and it'll send you on this bizarre goose chase instead of giving you the most direct route.
Mm-hmm.
It also kept asking me like if this building I drove past every day was my workplace. There were just a couple of sort of weird quirks that it had that I started telling myself stories to try to make sense out of them that were like, well, obviously there's an intelligence in there that's like trying to nudge me in certain directions. Like that would explain this if like, it's telling me like, is this your workplace? Because it's trying to get me to apply for a job there. Or
Mm-hmm.
it's saying like, it's sending me on this weird roundabout route because like it knows there's something that I should avoid, or it knows that there's something I should see or whatever. I never got a job at this place that it kept asking me if I would, if I worked at. It wasn't, they had jobs available. I looked, but not anything I was qualified for. So, there was never a time where I was like, thank goodness I was sent bizarrely out of my way. Like never, but nonetheless, like, I'll tell myself stories, to explain the weird things in my life. I think everyone does that, but especially writers do that. So that was one piece. And then I started thinking about the phrase, the internet loves cat pictures. And I started thinking, what would it mean if that were literally true? And those two ideas kind of collided. And I was like, what if the reason there were so many cat pictures on the internet is that there's an actual intelligence within the internet that genuinely loves cat pictures, that wants them, that's like rewarding people subtly or overtly, that's like, that's circulating them because it thinks everybody wants them. I mean, I think everybody does want them, but like,
yeah.
maybe there's what if there was an actual intelligence at the heart of the internet? Oh, and then the third piece that came into this actually this was many, many years ago. This was just one of those things that sort of stuck around in my head. But I was at a party at a science fiction convention in like the early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a guy there who was a programmer for Google. And we were talking about artificial intelligence. And he said, by any measure that people would have proposed a decade ago, Google is already an AI.
Ooh.
And this was in the early 2000s. And he was right, because like at that point, I mean, this was long enough ago that the fact that you could like misspell something and Google would still know what you meant, that was new and tremendously exciting. Because I've been using search engines since they were like literally first available. Like I taught classes at my college as a student on how to use the brand new World Wide Web in 1994. And I showed people how to use the Yahoo search engine, that being what we had at the time. And then like a year or two later, actually, no, it might have been later that year, Alta Vista rolled out. And I got extremely good at the Boolean searching that Alta Vista offered. I was really, really good at finding things with Alta Vista. And I was actually reluctant to switch to Google when people started using Google because I was so good at Alta Vista. But then I like ran a couple of tests where I was like, I will search for it on this, I will search for it on that. And like, I pretty quickly concluded that the Google results were better, so I switched. One of the things that Google could do that just blew me away pretty early was that if I misspelled something, it could still find it. That was really novel when it was introduced. I was a computer user in the 90s, so I was a user in a period where like it was very easy to just make a computer just refuse to do anything because you failed to enter commands in exactly the right order. Like there are just a ton of computers were very, you really had to know what you were doing to get any sort of result. And so like being able to misspell or mistype, or I mean, one point a while back, I was like, I forgot the word okra and I was trying to remember the word okra. So I typed snot vegetable into Google and up pops the Wikipedia article for okra. Like it means that. Right. That absolutely, like in the 90s, if you told people like, we're going to be able to do this, people would have said that was artificial. You're talking about AI if you're talking about this. So anyway, so all those pieces came together, and that was where the story Cat Pictures Please came from. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, it's a story I found equally charming and kind of unsettling, especially the way, it brings you what it thinks you need to see. and it directs your life like that. So in some cases, that's a good thing. It helps a couple of characters figure out who they are and all that. But then, I keep thinking, boy, in the wrong hands, that could be.
Yeah. I mean, and it should be unsettling, right? And that part of what the story is about is boundaries. And I as a teenager, when I was a teenager, I wanted to help my friends, and I had very poor boundaries. I didn't have this kind of power, fortunately for everyone, but like my desire to be helpful and my awareness that like there were limits to what I could do. There was some real there's some real complicated stuff there, I think, for a lot of young people. And so that's kind of who the AI is. They are that person that's like, oh, I could help you, but you just have to let me run your life for a week or two. That's very much who the AI is in that story. And the AI is like, really wants to help, but it's like, do you want their help? I mean, maybe, but maybe not.
Yeah. And that could go horribly wrong, I'm sure.
Yes, could definitely go wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, do your Catnet books evolve from this short story, or are they kind of inspired by?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's based on the same AI, basically.
Okay.
As in the short story, more or less. Yeah. So the sequence of events there was that after I won the Hugo, I was able to find a literary agent again. I had been unrepresented for a number of years at that point. My first novel writing career kind of crashed and burned, partly because I had a trilogy that didn't sell particularly well, but also because the economy crashed just as that trilogy finished. And like no one was buying from anyone new. Certainly they weren't buying from somebody who wasn't new and had like not done super well on their previous outing. So I had a really hard time selling novels for a while. I wrote multiple novels that I wasn't able to sell, that I still haven't sold. But once I won the Hugo, I had an agent again. So she took a book that I had called Liberty's Daughter. So I wrote a series of linked short stories that were published in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction about a teenage girl who lives on a seastead run by kind of by libertarians and kind of by a corrupt cabal. So one of whom is her father. So it's a series of linked short stories, and I put them together into a fix-up, which is a novel that's made of linked short stories. Mm-hmm. So I gave that to my new agent, and she shopped that around. And Tortine took a look at that and was like, well, too much of this has already appeared in print, so we don't think we want to publish this, but we really like your stuff. And how would you like to write a novel based on cat pictures, please? And my agent came back and was like, have you ever thought about doing this? And I was like, I mean, sure, of course. I've totally thought about doing this. I mean, I could absolutely write a novel, a young adult novel, using that character, using the AI character, which is clearly what they wanted. I was like, yeah, I could do this. So I sat down, and I mean, I talked earlier about like the short story sized idea and the novel sized idea. I needed to come up with a novel sized idea that used this character because, just like this AI, endlessly tries to help people and gets them in trouble instead. Like that's going to be funny for part. That's not going to sustain an entire novel. So, so over the course of the novel, the AI tries to help. There's the other protagonist. There's two protagonists. One is the AI, and the other is a teenage girl named Steph. And Steph, the AI tries to help Steph, make Steph's problems a whole lot worse, tries to get her out of them, gets itself into huge problems, and then Steph has to rescue the AI. So, and it's a story about online friendship, and it's a story about online connections, and the ways that teenagers will try to help each other, and And also it's a story about stalking, since like the reason why Steph and her mother are Steph at the beginning of the story is moving to a new town because her mother moves her like every few months they move. And it's because they're on the run from her father, who's super dangerous. So, but it was, I was super happy with how it came out. Like it wasn't like, there's a lot of different ways to like come to to write a book, and somebody wants this, I'm going to go write it is totally a thing. So, yeah. And it was the first anybody had wanted a book for me in a long time. So I was pretty excited to, come up with something. And it's a weird book, but I think it's good. So, and Chaos on Catnet, the sequel. So.
Well, it's on my TBR list now. So it sounded really different in creative, and like I've said, I've been enjoying your short stories, so I'm definitely going to give those a look. What are some of your long-term goals for this series? Is this going to be what you're going to be writing in the foreseeable future, or
I'm going to write something else next? I may circle back to it, but I've got a couple of ideas, and the thing that I'm currently just sent to my writers group for critique is some opening chapters for a story that's kind of like gothic suspense, but science fiction, and has a teenage girl, also young adult, teenage girl gets sent to live with her uncle to like help take care of her much younger cousin. And her uncle is a robotics engineer and also super creepy. And so she lives in a giant isolated house full of humanoid robots that fall right into the uncanny valley. Or if not everybody's familiar with the uncanny valley problem, so I'll just briefly explain it. One of the things that seems to be true is that like robots that don't look at all human sometimes are cute and appealing. Sometimes they're terrifying, like those robot dogs, kind of terrifying, but but they have the potential to be like cute and appealing, like R2-D2 is adorable. But if you try to make a robot look human, there's this long period of time where it gets closer and closer and closer to human, but also gets creepier and creepier and creepier until you've like crossed the barrier and you just get indistinguishable. But when it's almost but not quite, that is incredibly creepy. So she's in a house full of robots that have been designed to look human that kind of manage it, but not quite. So like she's like living in the uncanny valley. And we'll see.
I think that sounds great. That sounds good. Yeah. And then the Hugo Awards this year, they're in December. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you got your fingers crossed here.
Yeah. Well, I get 2 opportunities to win or lose, which,
Right. I've read a couple of the other ones nominated, and you got some stiff competition, it looks like, but
some really good stories. They're almost always, that's almost always true. Really good, really, really good stuff. I really love John Wiswell's Open House on Haunted Hill. That story is just delightful.
I haven't read that one. I've read the Zombie Moms one, which
that's the Blake Carson story.
Yeah,
that's a great story.
Oh, that was really good. Yeah. A lot of good recommendations for us today. Yeah. All right. Well, I want to do a segment with you. For lack of a better title, I'm calling 3 Questions with. So today we have 3 questions with Naomi Kritzer. And these are 3 questions I'm going to ask my guests. So you're the first one to run the gauntlet here. So you're going to set the standard for everyone. No pressure.
Okay.
All right. Question number 1. Who is your favorite author, or what are some of your favorite books that you'd say these are my top 1, 2, or 3 stories?
My favorite author is Lois McMaster-Bujold, and probably my favorite book is her novel Paladin of Souls. But like, I really like her stories in the world of the 5 gods, and I also really love The Curse of Chalian, and I really love the Penric and Desdemona novellas. It's just a terrific world, and I love Lois's storytelling and her plots and her characters. Like her books are just perfect. I love them all.
No, I don't think I've read her. Maybe I don't know. I'd have to look.
You might be more familiar with the Miles Verkosigan series.
Yeah, I've read one of those. Right. Yeah, I just read that one a couple of years ago or last year. Yeah, it was last year. But this is partly why I started the podcast, is to help my TBR list get longer.
So, one way to do it.
That's right. I need some good ideas. I noticed a couple of years ago, I started keeping track of what I read, and it was all, it was all kind of the same thing by, white older men who, I need diversity here. So I tried to change it up a bit, but these all sound good.
I would start with The Curse of Chalion. If the Miles stuff didn't totally grab you, like try reading The Curse of Chalion, which is the first of her books set in the world of the five gods. And it's about this, like, one of the things that's sort of unusual about both Curse of Chalion and Paladin of Souls is that they're stories of middle-aged people, as opposed to young people on a quest. Kazarel, who's the hero of The Curse of Chalion, is he's 35. He was and at the beginning of the story, he was recently freed after having been sold to the galleys. So he spent a year and a half as a galley slave after being a military commander who's held out through this extended horrible siege and was then told to surrender by his superiors. And so he did, and then he got sold to the galleys. And so now he is dealing with trauma. He is dealing with physical injuries that have left him with some degree of disability, and he's just sort of he thinks of himself as just broken. He is the world of the five gods, the gods are literally real, they're definitely there, although they have very clear limits to their powers. And he's on a god-given task, though he doesn't realize it. And it's just, the characters in it are so good. It's such a good story. It's epic fantasy, but it's also say when I hear epic fantasy, I worry that I'm going to need an outline and a notebook to keep track of what's going on. And it's never true in her books. You always can keep track of who's who and keep track of what's going on without a page of notes, a dramatis personae, and a chart. You don't need those for her books. So highly, highly recommended.
That sounds really good. Yeah, I'm gonna look into that one for sure. All right. Secondly, what was an early experience where you learned that language or stories had power?
So I thought about this one. When I was 4 years old, my first exposure to science fiction. When I was 4 years old, my parents told me they were going to take me to a movie, which they didn't do very often. They took me to see Star Wars, and it blew my mind. I loved Star Wars. And I think back and I'm I don't even know what it was about it that grabbed me as strongly as it did. Was it the glowing swords? Was it the spaceships? What was it? I don't know. But it was love at first sight for science fiction. And that was something, this was before I could read. But once I learned to read and reached the point of being able to choose my own books, I discovered that there was a whole category of book that had spaceships in it or had magic in it. And that was also just just an oh brave new world moment for me as a little kid. One of the other stories I thought about noting when you told me the three questions. When I was little, I was the oldest of three kids. Our school wasn't terribly far away. It was just a couple of blocks. So my sister and I would walk to school together, and I was supposed to walk her to and from. I wasn't supposed to leave her to walk herself. I was supposed to, be there to be the older sibling. Mm-hmm. And so to pass time during our walk, which seemed incredibly long, it wasn't, but I was little. I would tell my sister stories, and she would hang on to every word. She loved having stories told to her. And I found out from her recently that she assumed for years that all big sisters told stories, that this was simply part of your duties. If you were a big sister, you were supposed to tell stories to entertain your younger siblings. That was part of your job.
Yeah.
And I will note that I just assumed that if you were a big sister and you wanted to like ramble, that of course your little sister would hang on your every word. Like that's what little sisters are for.
Right.
But she was very surprised to find out later on that this didn't come standard. And but my younger siblings were my very first fans. And we went on road trips when I was older. I would write my stories down, and I remember a very early version of the novel that eventually turned into that trilogy that didn't sell well. I wrote on a trip out west, a road trip, where I would write a couple of pages, and then my sister would take them and read them, and then my brother would take them and read them. So like I was writing, and my siblings wanted to read it as it, page by page as it got completed. And like in terms of like experiences that made me think, oh yeah, my stories matter. Like having like younger siblings who thought my stories were amazing definitely did not hurt.
Oh yeah. Really feeds your encouragement as well as your ego a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, my parents like certainly encouraged me, but like,
yeah.
I mean, when your mom says yes, your stories are good. Like, I mean, they're your mom. Like,
yeah.
They're supposed to tell you that. When you're getting your siblings who will like call you ugly and tease you, tell you that your stories are good. Like that's much more validating.
Right. I can remember watching Return of the Jedi in theaters. I was probably about 4 or so, 3 or 4. That's the first movie I remember seeing, and tremendous impact on me.
Yeah.
Those films, especially the original trilogy, are just phenomenal. To capture that I don't know, power of storytelling. But that's great. Where would we be without our siblings, I guess, too? Right. My sister continues to be my biggest fan. So that's always fun. Final question here this afternoon. What advice do you have for any aspiring writers?
So when I was in college, I took a creative writing class called Crafts of Writing a Short Story. At the end of the class, one of my classmates asked the professor if he thought any of us had what it takes to be real writers. And she was clearly asking a question about talent. Mm-hmm. And he kind of heaved a grumpy sigh and said, I have no idea if any of you have what it takes, because what it takes is persistence and sticking with it. And I don't have any way of knowing which ones of you are going to do that, if any. There's just no way to know for me. So could be any of you, could be none of you. I don't know. And at the time, I thought like, oh, persistence. I can totally do that. And in fact, that is the thing that I did. That many, though not all of my classmates, there are other people who were in this class who are now published writers. I dug out my class list a couple years ago and looked everybody up, and some of them have names like Daniel Johnson, or who knows. There are millions of people with that name, and some of them are published writers, and I don't know if that's the same guy. But some of them I was like, oh yeah, no, this is definitely her, and this is the novel that she published in 2011. So definitely some of them have kept writing and stuck with it. But the main thing I did, I don't look at my stories that I was writing in that class and the stories that other people were writing and say not surprising, this person is published and this person isn't. We were all kind of at the same, we were college students. We didn't have a ton of life experience. All of us could put a sentence together and a paragraph together and tell a story and have sentences that made sense. And we knew sort of some basic stuff. What mattered was persistence and sticking with it. And so that is my advice to new aspiring writers is the persistence is really key, and you have to stick with it. Almost no one is successful right out of the gate. Almost everybody, I'm never going to say nobody, because there's always a few weird stories where somebody sits down, writes a story for the very first time in their life and sells it somewhere like the New Yorker. it's happened a couple times. Usually not good for people when it does.
Yeah.
There's usually some like buildup of skill that happens. And if you like hit a grand slam your very first time at bat, everything you do after that is like, people are like, you're just not living up to your early potential. So you don't want to be the person, you want to be the person who builds slowly if you can.
Right.
But almost everybody, writes a lot of stories that never sell. They submit a lot of stories and get a lot of rejections. They, and if you want to succeed, you have to stick with it. You have to keep writing. You have to keep submitting. And no one's going to make you do that. If you're like, you know what, this is an unrewarding way to spend my time, I would rather do something else with my time, that's fine. Like, you can totally I have friends who were like, you know what, I actually enjoy music way more than I enjoy writing. I'm going to focus on that. That's fair. That's reasonable. But persistence really is the biggest thing you have to do in order to succeed as a writer.
So we could say of you that phrase, nevertheless, she persisted, right?
Right. Yes, that's true.
I mean,
although I didn't ever have anybody like threatening. I remember she got censured, she got kicked out. I can't remember, she got fined. There's only thing that was going to happen is I was going to keep getting like polite rejection letters. Writers, it's demoralizing to get rejection letters, but they're not going to say the rejection letters that Snoopy gets in the Peanut strip that are like, please burn your typewriter. No one should have, no, people don't usually, if somebody sends a rejection like that, definitely show it around, because that's weird and people will want to see it. Most of the time your rejection letters will just be a form that says, dear writer, thank you for showing us your story. It did not meet our needs at this time. They tend to be very just polite, generic no's, and it's just life. That's usually how it works, and it's demoralizing, but it's not harrowing.
Mm-hmm. It's just part of your journey to get better and to find your audience. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Naomi, for your wisdom and your stories. I really am glad you persisted, and I found your work. I love finding new writers, because it's like I find a treasure chest or something,
Well, thank you so much for having me on today. This was really fun.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. And if folks want to reach out to you, if I'm almost afraid to ask about your social media, but
okay, I'm on Twitter as Naomi Kritzer.
Mm-hmm.
I have a website at naomikritzer.com. If people want to get in touch by email, my email address is my name @gmail.com. So.
All right. And your books are widely available. I didn't have any trouble finding them. So, all right. Thank you. And again, folks, if you haven't read Little Free Library, go read it, and be on the lookout for her books. Her newest one right now is on sale, Chaos on Catnet, and it's book 2 in the Catnet series. So, Naomi, thank you very much for coming on today.
Thank you so much.
So have you ever wondered how those little free libraries got started? I remember when they started popping up. We actually have a couple just within driving distance of where I live. But I can remember when they started popping up, and I thought that was a pretty neat idea. Kind of a fun way to not only recycle books, but be an encouragement to people, especially those who may not have the money to afford a book. But in researching a little bit, and you can go to the littlefreelibrary.org website and find out all the information you want about this process. But it looks like they started building the sharing boxes back in 2009 in Wisconsin. The man who organized this, Todd H. Bull, in 2009, he created the first Little Free Library book sharing box at his home in Hudson, Wisconsin. And it really caught off after that. And today, there is more than 165 million books that have been shared through registered Little Free Libraries. And as their website says, this has profoundly increased book access for readers of all ages and backgrounds. There's so much information on the website about books and different initiatives they're involved with. In 2016, there were 50,000 Little Free Libraries found in all 50 states as well as 70 countries. And so then by 2020, the Little Free Library donated its 100,000th book sharing box to the Association for the Advancement of Mexican Americans in Houston, Texas. And I love the work that it seems they're doing to reach out to different diverse communities like that. I think that's really important. So I love what they did, how they took this passion for reading, this passion to get books into the hands of the people, and they just turned it into this global library. I've seen some on the website. There's some real creative pictures up. And like I said, we have some libraries around town. They were built by the kids in the community. It was a library project a couple years ago. So they were painted by the kids and put up in locations around town. But I thought that was neat. And one is at a park where I go to walk around sometimes and get some exercise. And I wondered, because I always wondered about these things, like, is this the place just to put junk books in? How effective is it really being? But someone definitely keeps it up. There's usually a fresh supply of books in there. To be honest, I've seen some really good selection of books there in the box. So if you have a box or you know of one, make sure you're keeping a good fresh supply of books in there for folks. But I would love to see if you have any Little Free Libraries in your area. I always thought I would like to get one and paint it to look like the TARDIS, because I have a saying I think I found online, but it says something like, books are my TARDIS. I like that idea. So if I did a Little Free Library, I definitely would paint mine to look like the TARDIS. So how about you? Do you have one? How would you decorate it if you had one? Let me know. So you can send me an email again to Bookshelf Odyssey Podcast @gmail.com. And I'd love to hear from you. Well, if you have a suggestion for a future guest, I would love to know that as well. I've got some great episodes coming up, but I'm always on the lookout for a new author or a new topic to discuss about these wonderful stories that are in our hands. Coming up next week, we're going to try to flex our poetic muscle, and we're going to be talking about poems next week. I like poetry. It's an area of literature that I haven't read a lot of, because I kind of struggle sometimes to understand what the poem is saying. So I have invited a guest on. Her name is Sandrine Marois, and she is a French-Canadian poet, and she's just released a book called After the Fires of Day, and it's a collection of haiku poems. I'll talk more about that in the next episode. But she's coming on next week, so I look forward to seeing you then next Friday, the beginning of October, and then we have some great guests lined up in the month of October, and a couple of spooky season celebration episodes, so stay tuned for that. As always, if you like the show, I would love to have your support. If you could like and subscribe and share this episode however you see fit, that really does help us out a lot and will help us find our audience. And I greatly appreciate that. All of you who have subscribed and have listened, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Also, be sure to go check out our YouTube page. I'll be posting videos there at least once a week, very likely twice a week. You can check us out there. And if you'd like to support the show financially, there's a couple of links in the show notes. You can check those out. And that will bring us to the end of September, the end of this episode. So let me know what your favorite science fiction book or author is. And until we meet again, I hope you are well. So be kind to yourself and read good books. Take care.